Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We are chatting about winning work in the National Health Service, the NHS. And we're doing this in partnership with one of our clients, Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust. We've got a few people booked onto the webinar this morning. So as we let people have time to join, I'll just do some introductions and some quick housekeeping guidance. If you've not joined one of Go for Growth's webinar before, you might not know who I am. So for those who don't, my name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of 3 co-founders and directors of Go for Growth. Go for Growth is a partner to Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust for marketplace development. Our job is to work with the public sector and the marketplace to try and connect the two. In other words, our job is to try and support smaller local providers to be able to take part in public sector opportunities. We are on Zoom today, as is usually the case with a Go for Growth webinar. The session is being recorded today. A copy of both the recording and the slide deck that I'm using today will be circulated. We have got a tiny bit of backlog, but I'm hoping to get the slides and the recording out before the end of this week, so by the end of tomorrow. We can take questions throughout the session. I have carved out some time for questions at the back end. But if you would like to say hi and introduce yourself in the chat functionality, that is enabled. Please feel free to do so. And we also have the Q&A functionality. I'll keep an eye on both this morning, so please do feel free to use either of those should you want to. But if we kick off, I'm going to cover effectively a couple of different lenses, the key stages in an open tender process. So if you are wanting to bid with any public sector organisation, but in this particular context in the NHS, these are likely to be the stages that you will interact with. So we kick off with an opportunity being advertised. In public sector, there are a couple of Cabinet Office government issued free search engines. So we have Contracts Finder, which is for opportunities that are under threshold, and I'll talk you through what the thresholds are in a second. And we've got Find a Tender Service, also known as the Central Digital Platform, and I'll talk to you about the Central Digital Platform in a bit. Any opportunities that are above threshold would be on the Find a Tender Service. So you can use either of those search engines to find opportunities that you're looking for. And what they will do is point you to the portal that the particular contracting authority is using. And there are lots of different portals that are in use. The NHS specifically, as it stands at the minute, it's called Health Supply Europe, I think, when you go onto it, but it is driven by Atomis. So you can also search through that particular portal in and of itself if you want to. Have just noticed a quick question in the chat. Yes, a copy of the recording will be sent out to all registered attendees and a copy of the slides that we're using today as well. Hopefully that's helpful. So once you have seen and found an opportunity that's advertised, and under the Procurement Act, there are pre-market engagement pipeline notices as well. So you can choose to have a look for something that is coming in the future, not necessarily that is just live at the minute. But when an opportunity is ready for you to be able to take part in, it will be advertised in a tender notice. And you'll be able to find that either through Find a Tender if it's over threshold, or Contracts Finder if it's under threshold, or you could find it through the portal as well that the NHS use. Just to tell you what the thresholds are, for goods and services, it is currently, including VAT, 214,904 for goods and services. And for works, that's 5,372,609. And if the light touch regime is being utilised, which would typically be for social care type applications, then the threshold would be 663,540. And that's really important when you're thinking about where you're looking for an opportunity on the search engine. So regardless of value, it should be on the procurement portal that the NHS is using. certainly down to a lower limit anyway. If it is above 25,000, more often than not, it'll be on Contracts Finder. And if it's above those thresholds that I've just talked to you about, it will be on the Finder Tender Service, also known as the Central Digital Platform. Once you've found your opportunity, there is a time-sensitive process called a clarification period. And effectively what that means is you have a certain amount of time in which to ask any questions where you require points of clarity. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to use the specification and how to answer questions for bids in a second. But asking clarifications, the piece of advice we would always give is do that as early as possible, because it does close, it is time sensitive. And if you later find that you need some information to be able to submit your bid and you've missed that deadline, that could be fairly catastrophic. You will inevitably, at some point, if you've decided to push forward, you will submit your tender for evaluation, and that is the scoring process. Once that is all done, there will be an intent to award. And at that point, everybody gets their feedback. So depending on what type of procurement it is that the NHS are putting out, so there might be winners and losers. If it is a dynamic market, you can join that at any time. If it is an approved provider list or something called a flexible procurement system, we don't have DPSs anymore under the new regulations, a dynamic purchasing system. But if you were already on a dynamic purchasing system, that will continue to until its end. But generally speaking, there are potentially winners and losers in almost every competition. So there'll be an intent to award, and at that point, you'll get your feedback. So you'll be notified as to whether you've been successful or unsuccessful. If it's above threshold, that feedback process. And actually on Monday, I did a webinar just dedicated to the feedback process, which I've got a link to in a later slide. You'll get your scores, the winning bidder scores, and your assessment summary. What happens then is, if we're over threshold, a standstill period would be invoked. Under the new regulations, that's 8 working days, and that is triggered when the contract award notice is issued. And what we expect is the contract award notice and the feedback letters will all go out on the same day. That is your opportunity to think about whether you agree with the decision. And if you disagree with the decision, decide whether you wish to challenge it or not. You can do that within that standstill period, but you do have 30 days to challenge from when you knew or ought to have known that you believe that there was a breach in process. So it's not about just being unhappy about the result, but actually whether you think the result is wrong or whether you think the process has not been appropriately run. Assuming that standstill goes through as it should, then we get to the award stage. I'm just going to look at some questions in the chat. There is a question about sponsorship for international applicants. I'm not sure what that question is about. So perhaps if you want to email me some more detail after the webinar, I'll see if I can answer that for you. And there's a question around, if you are a loser, is it worth negotiating some proposal in any way? In a contract, if you are unsuccessful, what you won't have the opportunity to do is negotiate, to do something in any case. What you might have the opportunity to do is join the supply chain of the winning bidder, potentially. So you might think about, depending on what it is that you've bid for, whether you could supply via the winning bidder as a subcontractor potentially. But depending on the type of procurement, there might be an opportunity to negotiate, but you would know that from the documents, and it would, if you're unsuccessful post-negotiation, then you don't have the opportunity in public sector to negotiate any further after that point. So in terms of finding opportunities for the NHS, there are live links in here when you get the slide deck. So it will take you to Atomis, and it will take you to the Finder Tender Service. So you can use those. There is Contracts Finder also, as I've said. We've got some tutorial videos. So embedded in these graphics on here, excuse me, are tutorial videos for Contracts Finder and also for the Atomis system as well. So that will help you if you've not registered on there before. That will help you to work through that registration process so that you have got a profile set up on Atomis, and it will help you utilize the search engine on Contracts Finder and Find a Tender Service as well. We have something called the Central Digital Platform. So it actually is the Find a Tender Service. So they are one and the same thing. So the URL is there, findatenderservice.gov.uk. Following the new regulations, the Procurement Act 2023 that came into force on the 24th of February this year, the Central Digital Platform, the Find a Tender Service, is where all notices will be published. So whether that's pre-market engagement, pipeline notices, tender notices, contract change notices, payment notices, supplier performance notices, and there are a lot more notices than there used to be. So there used to be 5 and now there's 15. And that is all designed to help providers see what's happening at every stage of the process. And they'll all be in that one place. Now, you can search for opportunities using Find a Tender without registering for the Find a Tender service. There is something embedded in the Find a Tender service now called the Supplier Information System. And if you want to interact with or bid for any opportunities, you must now be registered to the Find a Tender Service, the Central Digital Platform, and you must have completed your supplier information. And you'll receive something called a share code when you do that, and you'll have a unique identifier, and both that and your share code will be used when you're bidding. And effectively, the process is that the information you put into the supplier information system will be pulled through automatically to the portals, in this case, Atomis, for example, so you won't have to enter any of that information again in the individual bids. So you can search without having a registration profile, but if you want to interact with any opportunities and bid with any opportunities, you will need to register. Now, I've popped on here a tutorial video for registering for the Central Digital Platform and completing the supplier information. It's about a 20-minute long video. So you'll need to carve out some time. Each of the stages are referenced in the description of the video. So if you wanted to go to a specific stage in the video, such as exclusions, for example, you can do so. But if you've not registered for the Central Digital Platform already, if you're going to bid for public sector opportunities that are above threshold, you will need to be registered. So I think it is one of the big changes of the Procurement Act. What's useful for providers is if you're interested in NHS opportunities, then they should all now be in one place, which will be useful. And not just the NHS, actually, for anybody. They'll be available for everyone. I'm just seeing on the chat that somebody is saying that the video isn't available anymore. I'm just not sure if that means that you can't see me anymore, or if you're asking if the video will be available after the session. So let me know if you can't see me anymore. The training video isn't available anymore, right? This one that I've just talked about here, I will have a look at that. It should be, there's no reason why it wouldn't be, so I'll have a look at that. Thank you for flagging that. So I think it is one of the big changes. What's difficult for providers is having to go to lots of different places, and this is certainly trying to pull all information into one space for all the public sector, including the NHS, above threshold. And so that should be useful. And over time, the supplier information system should expand so that we can put our information in one. So things like hopefully insurances, accreditations, licenses, more of that information that will be general to most bids. And that means we won't have to enter that information twice, which is also useful. In terms of the process itself, I've broken it down into 6 key elements that you would see. So Once you've done you've found the opportunity, you have registered on whatever portal it is, etc. You've got the opportunity, you've downloaded all your documents. What you'll see in there is something called an invitation to tender. And that will have all of the instructions that you need for the bid. I'm going to talk you through specification, evaluation criteria, and answering questions in a second. But fundamentally, these are the processes that you'll see. There's likely to be something called the Standard Selection Questionnaire, which is now called the Procurement Specific Questionnaire, a PSQ. And there are live links in 2, 3, 5, and 6. So I've just done a lunch and learn in March on the Procurement Specific Questionnaire, which is very similar to the Standard Selection Questionnaire, which will still be in use for call-offs from frameworks or DPSs potentially under the old regs, the public contract regs of 2015, and the PSQ, the Procurement Specific Questionnaire, will be used for new procurements post 24th of February. So you can see both of those. There'll be something called a specification. It does what it says on the tin. It tells you about what the organisation is trying to buy, what's important to them, and why it's important to them. We'll talk about spec in a second. The scoring criteria and any weightings that are applicable will be there also. In every bid, you'll be tested on quality or technical, potentially. You might be tested on your social impact and contribution as well. And you may well be tested on pricing. And when I talk about weightings, your quality and technical might have a weighting of, say, 60%, social value might have 20%, and pricing might have 20%. There's a bid that I'm looking at the minute where it is 100% quality and price is not being tested. And within that quality, there is social value as well. So those weightings can help you understand where the most important things are. There will always be legal terms and conditions. Again, you can listen to our Lunch and Learn webinar on legals and that feedback process that I talked through. So you can listen to that webinar on feedback as well. So the specification, it is arguably, in my view at least, one of the most important documents in all of your document pack, because it basically tells you what the contracting authority, in this case the NHS, is wanting to buy. So it's a crucial document. One of the first jobs that we do, and this may or may not be right for you as bidders and businesses, but one of the first jobs that we do is we work through the specification thoroughly. We make a note of any clarification questions that we might have. We note any evidence that we might have that will potentially be important when we get to answering quality questions. We make a note of any gaps that we might have as well. And it allows us to make a decision on, can we deliver what's in this specification? Should we bid this? Does it feel right to us? Can we do all of it, enough of it, etc.? And can we evidence that we can do that? And do I have any questions about it? If we've got too many gaps, if you've got too many gaps, you might decide that it is not appropriate for you to bid it. So that specification can really help you with your go, no go decisions. The quality questions that you will answer in the bid effectively will be relating back to the specification. They're effectively testing your ability to be able to deliver what's needed. So when you are answering questions, we'll be referencing back to that specification often. And it's worth noting that you should only be tested in evaluation criteria, something that is within the specification. So if there's a quality question that doesn't relate back to the specification, you might want to call that out through clarification process. So the evaluation criteria, the scores, effectively, there's two types of criteria in a bid. The selection criteria that we talked about, the procurement specific questionnaire or the standard selection questionnaire, they're basically testing your business. They're looking at how your business is made up. So it'll look at your insurances, your accreditations, your policies, your financial, economic and financial standing. It'll look at your capability, what you've been doing over the last few years, that kind of thing. The evaluation criteria is more of a look forward. So it will be asking you how you will do something. And our job is to say, this is how we will do something, and back that up with evidence. So that might be because you've done it before. So you can say, here is how I have done this before, and this is how I measure and monitor compliance, and I measure success, etc. Or if you haven't done it before, for example, if you're a new startup, it will be thinking about how you will do it and how you evidence that infrastructure that you have around answering that question to demonstrate that you can do it to the standard that is required. When we talk about weightings at question level, so let's think about 60% of all of our marks are applicable to quality. If there were then 4 questions, 100% of that 60% will then be divvied up across those 4 questions. So it might be that 3 questions are 30% weighting and 1 is 10%, or they're all 25%, or 1 has 50, 2 have 20, 1 has 10. Those question weightings will tell you where to focus your effort. So the higher the weighting, the more focus that you're going to want to give to it, because the higher score that you can get and the more points you can get if you get a better score in that. There might be things called a threshold question where they're either pass fail, or there's a minimum score that you need to meet in order to continue. And if you don't meet that, you might be disqualified. So the rest of your bid wouldn't be evaluated. All of those things will be really clear. So the question weighting will be clear, whether it's a threshold question, a pass fail, all of that will be really clear to you. But it can really help you from a resourcing perspective to think about how you would set up your resources for that particular bid. And this is what an evaluation criteria might look like. So often they are 0 to 5, 0 to 100, etc. You'll usually have a score and what that score means. So in this case, unacceptable is 0, and that's failed to provide a response, or the response provided is wholly inconsistent with the requirements outlined within the question. Or we're after scoring a 5, which is it covers all the elements of the requirements outlined from the question. It provides a high level of relevant and detailed information backed up with clear evidence, demonstrates a robust and coherent understanding of the council or the NHS trust requirements, and with no issues, weaknesses or omissions, not emissions. When you're answering your questions, what you'll be thinking about is, would I score myself a 5? And if so, why? So have I covered all the elements of the requirements outlined in the question? And you should be able to tick those off, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. A high level of relevant and detailed information. Have I backed up what I've said I'm going to do with clear evidence? So I evaluated a tender once where in a bid, and it was for a health-based contract, a provider had said, we are world class at eradicating modern slavery. And I thought, wow, that's going to be amazing. But that was all they said. And what they didn't do was provide any relevant or detailed information about how they did that. They didn't provide any evidence. So it was literally a statement and nothing to back it up. And they didn't link that statement with the requirements of the tender. So it was not able to be scored as high as I imagine the bidder who had written it had hoped that they would get. But we can use the scoring criteria and the specification together to help us maximise our score potential. You can view all questions before submitting. Absolutely, you can. Yeah, so you will see all questions before you submit, and you will write all of your answers before you submit. And generally speaking, the process in a bid is you'll be working in a Word document of some sort. So you'll be downloading from the portal the response document, or that could be embedded in the ITT. You'll be writing your answers. So if you wanted to share your answers with a colleague and ask them to look at the specification and the criteria, you can do that. But you will have every opportunity to view and answer all questions before you submit. You would never submit, obviously, without answering all the questions. And before you start answering any, you can read all of the questions to determine whether or not you want to go ahead. So let's think about answering those questions then. Again, this isn't the Holy Grail, but it's the kind of approach that we take, and it seems to work quite well. And so it's what we tend to coach on. It sounds really obvious, but we only want to answer the question that we've been asked. So we don't want to go off at tangents. We want to give them as much detail and relevant and proportionate information that we can, but we want that to always be related back to the question. But we're going to break the question down into verb elements, and I've got an example of this on the next slide. And we're going to want to evidence whatever we're writing down as much as possible. We might be asked for specific documents. Often you might be asked for an implementation plan, or some sort of mobilisation plan or something like that. If you are asked to provide any specific documents, then double check that you have uploaded those with your submission. And it's worth noting that there might be some sort of constraints. So some particular tenders might have a word count. So whether it's the NHS Trust or the council, the police force, whoever it is, if it's a word count, whoever the contracting authority is, they will be really strict at cutting off at that word count. So if it says there's 500 words, and you write 510, the last 10 will never make it to the evaluator. They won't see it. It'll be simply redacted in the governance checks. If there's a page count on there, it's likely that there would be a size of page, A4, for example, and a font specification. So it would usually be 2 pages of A4 using font size Arial 11, something like that. And that's to make sure that everybody has a fair and equitable opportunity to put their submission in. There won't always be word counts or page counts. You might be able to talk at your leisure. However, regardless, actually, even if there is a word or a page count, I would say don't repeat the question. You don't need to. The contracting authority doesn't need that. Don't waffle. Be concise. Be to the point. Answer the question. If I give you an example of this, so this was a question that a particular contracting authority put together. So it says, please describe your approach to working in partnership with a range of local community organisations in promoting social inclusion, independence and well-being. Describe how this will meet the needs of young people who are 18 to 25 experiencing mental health challenges. And your response has asked to include examples of how you're working with other local organisations, how your support will provide, the support that you provide will promote social inclusion, independence and well-being, and how you'll adapt your provision to ensure it meets the needs of young people. And so in yellow, those are the things that we would be ticking off when we read the answer through. And in this case, we have 500 words, and it's actually linked us back to a specific part of the specification. Not all bids will do that, but you will be able to find what it's talking about in the specification. So we'll have to describe our approach to working in a partnership with a range of local community organisations. And in doing that, how we promote social inclusion, how we promote independence, and how we promote well-being. We want to describe how all of that meets the needs of young people who are experiencing mental health challenges. So in the specification, you would imagine that it would be talking about what those needs are of young people that this particular contracting authority or NHS Trust has detailed. We will include as a minimum examples of how we're working with other local organisations already, or if we're not doing that already, how we will work with them going forward, and those provisions that we'll put in place, how the support that we provide will promote that social inclusion, independence and well-being, and we'll be very specific with our evidence and examples of how we have done that or how we will do that, and how we'll make sure that our provision is adaptable so that it can really focus on meeting the needs of young people, and those needs may well change. So we'll be thinking about that adaptability, flexibility, the resilience of it, whether we can do that with some agility, etc. So what we can do by highlighting these things, when we've written our 500-word answer, we can go back and we can pick out of our answer and tick off, have we answered all those bits? Have we done that? And have we done that in a way that references back to the specification? And have we done that in a way that would help us get our maximum scores from the scoring criteria? So I'm just going to check. some chat. Can a coalition or joint bid be submitted made up of smaller organisations, or does there always need to be a main bid who meets the threshold with subcontractors? So you absolutely can use a consortia, collaboration, a special purpose vehicle. What there has to be is one legal entity that the NHS Trust will contract with. And so you would be either coming together as a collaboration. So effectively, there would be a lead body model. And actually, if you go onto we've got one coming up in a month or so, I think, a collaboration, partnerships and consortia webinar, and there are videos of our previous webinars on this. There are different models that you can use. The lead body model basically says you are a collaboration of equal partners, but in the bid, there would be a lead body who is the contracting authority, and the other members of that collaboration would be subcontractors to it. Or you would set up a special purpose vehicle, for example, where actually you create a new legal entity that all of the consortia parts feed into. You can do either of those things, and you can definitely put joint bids in. It's just a matter of working out what the right model is, and there are a few different models. So please do feel free to have a look at our information on consortia, collaboration, and partnerships. If the word count isn't specified, what would I say is an acceptable amount of content to write? It's an unanswerable question, actually. So I don't have a word count in mind. I wouldn't put a number against it. I think what I would say is try not to waffle too much. And I personally, my colleagues always make a bit of fun of me that why use 10 words when 100 will do. I think probably in bidding, you want to be the other way around. We want to be to the point. We want to be succinct. We want to be clear. We don't want to be so brief that we can't get our message across, but equally, we don't want to write a novel length answer for everything. So I think it's a really subjective thing if there's no word count available, but ask yourself, have I answered the question? Have I done it in a way that is clear? And have I backed it up with evidence? Have I done it in a succinct manner so I'm not over-telling the story? And if you're answering yes to all of those questions, whatever the word count is whatever the word count is. But I would be really challenging myself in terms of, have I over-told the story? If you imagine this is a big job application in lots of ways. So if you imagine that you're recruiting and you've got a job description and a person spec, so that's our specification, and you ask for an application letter, and you get one person submit an application letter on one page and one submit an application letter on 100 pages, and then somebody somewhere in between. The person with one page might not tell you enough to demonstrate that they can do the job that you're recruiting for. And the other person at page 50 might have talked for so long that you are now confused about all of the things that they are doing, that's no good either. So you're looking for that balance in the middle, enough information to create confidence in your evaluator that you can deliver the service specification in the way that they want to for the life of the contract, without being so brief that you can't evidence that, and being so written that actually you give the evaluator a different challenge. Hopefully that's helpful. And I just wanted to cover social value, and the NHS is quite specific in some ways. So I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with what social value is, but it's driven by something called the Public Services Act of 2012, which was assented to law back in January 2013. So it's not a new piece of legislation. It's been around for 12 years now. And effectively, what it links to, the Public Services Act, is what you can see in the right-hand corner, the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which has been adopted by all United Nations states in 2015. And what that does is provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, both now and into the future. And at the heart of that blueprint are 17 development goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. They're often referenced the SDGs. And they're an urgent call for action by all countries, both developing and developed, in a global partnership. And effectively, the goals are recognizing that ending poverty and other deprivations are really critical, but they also must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all whilst tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. And what you'll see in the social value model, and you'll see in the Public Services Act, the Social Value Act, as it's often called, you'll see those Sustainable Development Goal themes, those 17 themes running through everything that we're doing in public sector. What you're not asked to do as providers and bidders is have a strategy and an answer for all 17 goals. But what can be useful for us as providers is to understand where our business is impactful on which of those goals. So goal 8, decent working economic growth, that's really one of the main areas that Go for Growth is aligned with. What we're doing is helping smaller providers to grow in the public sector. But we also have a carbon programme, so we're also actually really well aligned to clean energy and climate action. So we can align our business with a handful of those goals that are really important to us and that we can demonstrate through our core business aims and aspirations. And it can be useful to have a look at those 17 goals to think about it. But the NHS, I'm not sure if you have heard about it before. And what I don't know, and I will caveat this, with the demise of NHS England, because this was hosted by NHS England, I'm not sure what happens to Evergreen, but the NHS are looking for sustainable suppliers. So they're thinking about the social impact and the environmental impact that NHS providers can bring about. There is a link on the system, on the slide deck even, to the Evergreen programme, which looks at sustainability in providers. It's free of charge, and it effectively looks at how green you are and how sustainable you are as a provider. And it's almost an accreditation. I don't think the NHS call it an accreditation, but it's sort of, it behaves like one. You will not be selected or deselected either with it or without it. But I know from recent conversations, but this was before NHS England was no more. It was a programme that was growing in stature and importance. So one to have a look at, I think, from a social value perspective. Again, as Go for Growth, we have lots of social value webinars that you can have a look at. So please do feel free to either join one or have a look at past ones that we've done. And then actually on the NHS, and this is very NHS specific, although you will potentially see the provider selection regime at play in other parts of the public sector where it's appropriate, but it is in the vast majority of cases only attributable to the NHS. The provider selection regime, and rather than go through the whole of it on this call today, there is a guidance document that we've pulled together that you can have a look at that's designed specifically for smaller organisations who want to supply the NHS. Effectively, what it's doing, the provider selection regime, is trying to offer a flexible approach to NHS procurement. So it's thinking about being outcomes based. So thinking about where patient clinical outcomes are at play and how they can engage health and care services. And it can be particularly beneficial for small to medium enterprises and voluntary community or social enterprises, VCSEs. Now, it's been in place for a while now. It's been in place over a year. So it came into force on the 1st of January 2024. What I do know from our colleagues in the NHS is that both the Procurement Act 2023 and the provider selection regime together is really helping them to think about how they go out to market and what they're asking the market for and when. And then finally, just to end on, bidding is not necessarily an easy process to go through, and there are common pitfalls that we will all fall foul of at some points. I'm not going to read the whole list out, but I'm just going to pick out some stuff. So caveating we've not talked about yet. what I would say personally on caveats, and what I mean by that is, if we do XYZ, it will be ABC price. But if we do ABC thing, it will be XYZ price. Unless the bid is specifically asking you for different scenarios, try to avoid caveating your answers or caveating your pricing, because it makes it really difficult to be evaluated. What public sector are trying to do is inspire equity, parity, fairness, transparency. And so actually, if we as bidders say, well, and we're not asked for scenarios, scenario A would look like this, but scenario B would look like that, and scenario C would look like this, how would they know where to score you? It would be really super tough. So if you can avoid caveating, please do. We've talked about evidence a few times, but I think it's really important that we have in our mind whenever we're bidding that we need to be able to back up what we're saying. And that might be that we've done it before, so we can use past evidence to demonstrate how we'll do something. But because sometimes we're startups, we might not be what we've done before. We'll be thinking about the evidence being based on the infrastructure that we've got in place that will allow us to deliver and evidence the delivery of what we're saying we can do. So if we're making claims about something, then how can we justify that? How can we back that up? And the other thing to say is assumptions. So you might be an existing provider to an organization, and you might be thinking, well, they'll work that out when we get there, or they will know that I do that because I always do that, or we always do that. In a bid situation, you can't assume anything. You can't assume that the bidder can take into account anything that you haven't written down. They're not allowed to do that. So if you want your evaluator to know something, or know that you will do something, or do something, you must write it down. You can only be scored on what's written down. So you might not get to the position of they'll work it out when they get there if you don't put everything in the bid answer that you need to put in. Make sure that you write everything down that you want the evaluator to know. Assume they don't know you. If you're going to make an assumption, make the assumption that they don't know you, and therefore you need to tell them everything that they need to know. The other assumption that we shouldn't make is that they understand our technical language. You won't always get a subject matter expert that evaluates your bid. So if you're using technical jargon, technical language, or acronyms, make sure that you have been clear about what you're saying. So I just used a term, subject matter expert. That's often acronymized. I don't know what the terminology is. The acronym for that would be SME, but it also means small to medium enterprise. So if you just put SME in your terminology, the context might give it away a little bit about what you're trying to say, but it might not be clear. So if you're using an acronym, spell it out at least once, so that your evaluator knows what you're saying. And if you're using technical language, don't assume that your evaluator will be a subject matter expert. So please be as clear as you can. I don't want to do my mum a disservice, but I often have my mum in mind because she's not a technical expert in either procurement or, generally speaking, what we'll be bidding for. But the test I give myself is, if I asked a non-expert, my mum, to read this, will she understand the story that I'm telling? Will she understand what I'm trying to put across? Have I made it clear enough? Have I made it, obvious enough? Have I backed it up with evidence? All of that stuff. If you want to stay in touch with us, because we know that this can be a really tough space, please feel free to do so. I'll also add my contact details in when the slide deck comes out. So if you want to have a further chat with me, you absolutely can. We've got an open bookable calendar, so you can book in, and all of our methods of getting information, our YouTube channel, our events, etc., will be on that slide. So I'll add that in. And that was it from me. Hopefully that's been helpful. If there are any further questions, please feel free to pop them either in the chat or the Q&A now. But if you do want to have a chat with me outside of this, please feel free. There was just one question on the back of that. If the word count's not available, what would you say is the acceptable amount of content to write? Can you use bullet points? I mean, the answer is, of course, you can use bullet points. My question would be, and I'll just stop sharing quickly. My question would be, do those bullet points tell the story the way you want to tell the story, and do they evidence? Have you included that evidence in there? So I think the acid test is always, have I answered the question? Have I given sufficient detail for my evaluator to see very clearly how we can deliver that part of the specification? Have I backed that up with evidence? And if bullet points help you to do that, then I think that's fine. But they would be the questions I would be asking. Will bullet points almost make it too brief, or actually are they helpful? And if it's the latter, then brilliant. Hopefully that was useful. All that remains for me to say is thank you ever so much for taking time out of your Thursday to join me this morning. If you do want to chat further, please do give me a shout. We are here to help, and all of the help that we provide is offered free of charge. So please don't worry that there would be a cost barrier to chatting with Go for Growth. There never is. So please feel free to get in touch. And hopefully I'll see you all on a Go for Growth webinar at some point in the future. Thank you ever so much.